I want to share something that happened to me a few years back. A night that still haunts me whenever I'm driving alone late at night. It's one of those experiences that you try to rationalize, but deep down, you know, something was horribly wrong. It started when I was driving home from a friend's house late one night. I was on one of those long, desolate highways, the kind that feels like it goes on forever, with nothing but darkness on either side. The road was empty, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. Out of nowhere, my car started sputtering. I glanced at the dashboard and noticed the fuel gauge was fine, but the engine just died. I pulled over to the side of the road and tried to start it again, but it was completely unresponsive. My heart sank as I realized I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, with no cell service to call for help. After a few minutes of trying to figure out what to do, I noticed a faint light up ahead, just off the highway. I figured it was worth checking out, so I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and started walking. As I got closer, I realized it was an old gas station, one of those small, rundown places that looked like it hadn't been open for years. But the light was on, so I thought maybe I could at least wait there until morning. When I reached the station, I pushed open the door. The place was as creepy as you'd imagine. Dust-covered shelves, a broken-down counter, and a single flickering light hanging from the ceiling. It was dead silent, except for the occasional creak of the old building. I wasn't exactly thrilled about spending the night there, but it was better than sitting in my car on the side of the road. I found a chair in the corner and sat down, trying to get comfortable. I figured I'd just rest and then figure out my next move. But as I sat there, I started to hear things. It was subtle at first, just a faint creaking, like the sound of old wood shifting. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind or the building settling. But then I heard something else. A whisper. It was so soft, I almost thought I imagined it. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and shone it around the room. But there was nothing there. Just the same empty gas station. I was starting to get really uneasy, so I walked over to the door, thinking maybe I should just leave and wait by my car. That's when I heard it again. The whispering. This time it was louder, more insistent, and it was coming from behind me. I turned around slowly, shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing. The room was empty, but the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me, was overwhelming. I decided I needed to get out of there. I rushed to the door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It was like the door was stuck or being held shut. I started to panic, yanking on the door, but it wouldn't move. And then the whispering grew louder. It was all around me, filling the room. It was like a chorus of voices all whispering at once, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. That's when the shadows in the room started to move. At first I thought it was just my eyes, playing tricks on me. But then I realized the shadows were actually moving, shifting along the walls and floor, almost like they were alive. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed away from the door, and that's when I heard the whispering turn into a single, clear voice. Stay. The air in the room felt thick, like it was closing in on me. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, as the shadows seemed to gather around me, pressing closer and closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something cold and sinister, brushing against my skin, pulling me deeper into the room. I was desperate. I ran to the back of the station, hoping there might be another exit. But there was nothing. No back door. No windows that weren't boarded up. I was trapped. The shadows were everywhere now, and the whispering was louder than ever, like a deafening chant in my ears. The room felt like it was spinning, and the walls started to shake. like the entire building was alive. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The voice was clear now, unmistakable. "They're coming." I had no idea who they were, but I knew I didn't want to find out. The whole station was trembling, the floor beneath me vibrating, like something was trying to break through. I ran back to the door, yanking on it with everything I had, and finally, it gave way. I stumbled out into the night, barely able to keep my balance. As I sprinted back to my car, I didn't stop until I was inside. The doors locked. I don't know how long I sat there trembling, waiting for whatever was in that station to come after me. But nothing happened. The gas station was dark and silent again, like nothing had ever happened. As soon as it was light enough to see, I got out of there. My car, which had been completely dead the night before, started without a hitch. I didn't question it. I just drove, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that the gas station was just an old, creepy building. But I know what I felt, what I heard. I never found out what was really going on in that gas station, and I never want to. But I've never driven that road again, and I never will. If your car ever breaks down in the middle of nowhere, and you find yourself near an old abandoned gas station, do yourself a favor. Don't go inside. I recently decided I needed a break from everything, so I rented a remote cabin deep in the woods. It seemed like the perfect spot to unwind, isolated, serene, and far removed from the noise and chaos of city life. The cabin was nestled in the heart of an old forest, surrounded by towering trees, with an eerie, almost palpable silence hanging in the air. The first night I tried to relax, but something just felt off. Around midnight, I started hearing strange noises coming from the attic. Faint footsteps, muffled thumps, and eerie whispers that seemed to echo through the walls. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling, or maybe some critters scurrying around. But the sounds kept getting louder, more insistent. It was like something was trying to get my attention. By the third night, my nerves were shot. I couldn't ignore the noises anymore, so I decided to investigate the attic. Armed with only a flashlight, I climbed the creaky staircase. With each step, the air grew colder, and when I reached the attic, it was exactly how you'd imagine it. Dusty old furniture, cobwebs everywhere, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. Then I noticed something strange. A door that I definitely hadn't seen before was slightly ajar, leading down into darkness. My heart started racing as I approached it. I knew I had to check it out, even though every instinct was screaming at me to turn back and leave. I descended the stairs, and it was like stepping into a different world. The air down there was oppressive, almost suffocating, and the darkness seemed to wrap around me. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. I shone my flashlight around and found myself in a hidden room filled with disturbing artifacts, faded photographs, old newspapers, and strange symbols scrawled on the walls. Then, I saw an old, leather-bound book lying open on a table. The pages were filled with bizarre notes and unsettling drawings. The more I read, the more I realized that this cabin had a dark, twisted history, one that I was now entangled in. The chilling realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Without wasting any time, I drove straight to the nearest town and called the police, detailing everything I had found. When they arrived, their reactions told me everything. They were shocked, horrified even. After examining the room, they confirmed that my discovery was far darker than I could have ever imagined. The artifacts and notes pointed to a serial killer who had used the cabin as a hideout and a staging area for his crimes. What terrified them, and me, was a detailed plan outlining the next victim's abduction, scheduled to happen in just 4 days. The police instructed me to leave immediately and warned me not to speak to anyone about what I had seen. They said the killer was still out there, and my safety was at serious risk. The cabin was sealed off, and the investigation was handed over to a specialized unit. The police assured me they would take it from there, but the fear in their eyes told me they were dealing with something far beyond the ordinary. Now, I'm left with a lingering sense of dread, knowing that the place I thought was a peaceful retreat was actually a site of unspeakable horrors. The chilling reality is that some places harbor dark secrets that should never be unearthed. As for that cabin, it remains a silent witness to the evil lurking in the shadows, its secrets now hidden away in the hands of the authorities. In 2007, while working on the cargo ship MV Spar, I encountered something that still chills me to the bone. Our voyage from Italy to India was going smoothly, until one fateful stormy night, when a routine inspection turned into a nightmare. The captain had asked me to check the cargo hold and ensure the hatch was tightly sealed, with the ship's lights off in that area to save power. I grabbed a flashlight and descended into the dark, claustrophobic space. As I began my inspection, the flashlight flickered and then died, plunging me into complete darkness. I tried to use my walkie-talkie to request the lights be turned back on, but the captain informed me it would take a few minutes. Alone in the darkness, my anxiety grew. The only light came from the moon, filtering through the portholes, casting eerie shadows across the cargo. Suddenly, I saw a figure, a shadow, at the edge of the room. My first thought was that my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I approached, I realized it was a woman, dressed in a long, white gown. Her appearance was unsettling, her presence out of place, in the middle of the ocean. Her hair flowed down her shoulders, and there was an otherworldly aura about her. I cautiously moved closer. The moonlight revealed her face. She appeared to be of South American descent. It was impossible. How could someone be here, in the middle of nowhere? I blinked, thinking it might be the effect of fatigue or a few drinks I had earlier, but she remained eerily still. Just as I was about to call for help, the ship's lights came back on, and she vanished. I ran to the deck, breathless and frantic, reporting what I'd seen. To the captain, he was skeptical, attributing my sighting to stress and exhaustion. A search of the ship yielded no trace of her, and my claims were dismissed as a figment of imagination. Weeks after the encounter, I was inspecting the cargo hold again, when something unusual caught my eye. On the floor lay a piece of clothing, a woman's dress, old and tattered. The fabric was stained with what looked like black ink. My heart raced as I recognized the dress. It was eerily similar to what the woman had been wearing during my previous sighting. With a sense of dread, I took the dress to the captain. His reaction was not what I expected. He listened intently as I described the dress, then revealed something chilling. "You're not the first to encounter her," he said. "Many crew members have reported seeing this woman before you. They describe her just as you did. But it's been a long time since anyone has seen her." He continued, "The story of this girl is something that's never been fully understood. It's as if she appears to a new person after many years and then vanishes again. People have tried to piece together her story, but no one truly knows who she was or why she appears. Most people don't believe in these sightings, but the evidence is there. You're the latest in a long line of people who have seen her." but it remains a mystery. The captain's words were unsettling. I felt a chilling realization. This ghostly woman was not just a figment of my imagination, but a part of the ship's dark history. The presence of the dress confirmed that my encounter was not an isolated incident, but a continuation of an unresolved mystery. Since then, I never saw her again. The memory of that night and the dress, stained with ink, left an indelible mark on me. It's a haunting reminder of how reality and the supernatural can intertwine in ways that defy explanation to this day. The ghostly woman remains a spectral enigma, her story a dark secret of the MV Spar. Back in high school, I went on this trip with my class to a small remote town in the Pacific Northwest. It was the kind of place that felt frozen in time, with dense forests surrounding it and a thick fog that never seemed to lift. The locals were nice enough, but they were always kind of distant, like they knew something we didn't. On the third night of our stay, my friends, Jack, Henry, and I decided to sneak out of our hotel. We'd heard rumors about a lake deep in the forest, supposedly haunted. According to some of the older townsfolk, they warned us to stay away from it. But of course, that just made us want to check it out even more. We were typical teenagers, looking for a thrill, convinced we were invincible. We left around midnight, armed with nothing but a couple of flashlights and our phones. As soon as we stepped into the forest, it felt like we'd crossed into another world. The trees were massive, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows in the fog, and there was this unnatural silence that made the whole place feel wrong. After what felt like forever, we finally reached the lake. It was smaller than I expected, but something about it immediately put me on edge. The water was so still. It looked like black glass, and the air around it was colder than it should have been. But we were there, and none of us wanted to back out, so we decided to get a closer look. There was this old, rotting rowboat, half submerged near the shore. We figured we'd take it out onto the lake, just to see what was out there. The boat creaked like it was about to fall apart, but we managed to get it into the water and started rowing out. The deeper we went, the thicker the fog got, until we could barely see the shore. The water was so smooth, it was like we were floating on nothing. But then, out of nowhere, the boat jolted. It wasn't just a small bump. It felt like something massive had hit us from underneath. We all froze, listening, but the silence was almost deafening. Before we could react, the boat rocked violently again, harder this time. Henry grabbed the oars and started rowing back towards the shore. But it was like we weren't in control anymore. The boat was moving on its own, being pulled further into the lake. And that's when we saw it, this pale, ghostly shape, just beneath the surface, moving too fast for us to make out any details. It was there, then gone, disappearing into the dark water. Emily gasped, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We all knew we should have turned back right then, but we couldn't. We were too far out, and whatever was in the lake wasn't going to let us go. The boat kept moving, drawing us to the center of the lake, where the water was darker, almost black. The air grew colder, our breaths coming out in white puffs, and that's when the smell hit us, a foul, rotting stench that made me gag. I remember thinking, this isn't right. We need to get out of here. But it was too late. The boat started sinking, slowly at first, then faster. As water poured in from all sides, panic set in, as we tried to scoop the water out with our hands. But it was useless. Then, without warning, something cold and slimy wrapped around my ankle, pulling me down. I screamed, thrashing, but whatever it was had a grip like iron. I looked down, and that's when I saw her. This figure, rising from the water, her face twisted in rage and sorrow. She wasn't alive. She was something else, something that had been trapped in the lake for God knows how long. Her eyes locked onto mine, And in that moment, I knew. We weren't getting out of there. The boat sank fast, dragging us down into the freezing water. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones as I struggled to hold my breath, the pressure crushing my chest. The water wasn't just cold, it felt alive, like it was pulling us deeper, wrapping around us like a shroud. Just before everything went black, I heard her voice, soft and mournful, echoing in my mind. "You shouldn't have come here." And then, nothing. When I woke up, I was lying on the shore, soaked to the bone, with no memory of how I got there. Jack and Henry were next to me, unconscious but alive. The boat was gone, and the lake was still and silent, like nothing had happened. We never talked about it after that, and we definitely never went near that lake again. But I still think about it sometimes, late at night, and I wonder what really happened in those dark waters, and why we were the ones who made it out. Henry had always been fascinated by the supernatural, using his popular YouTube channel to explore haunted locations that most people would never dare to visit. His followers loved the thrill of watching him push the boundaries, always searching for something darker, something more terrifying. So when a viewer suggested Stonebridge Asylum, an abandoned mental institution with a grim history, Henry knew he had found his next challenge. Stonebridge Asylum had been shut down decades ago, after a series of mysterious deaths and disappearances. Locals whispered about the inhumane experiments conducted on patients and the restless spirits that now haunted the crumbling halls. It was the perfect setting for one of Henry's investigations. He arrived at the asylum just after midnight. The air cold and still, the building loomed over him, its windows dark and hollow. Like the empty eyes of a skull, he started recording. As he made his way through the rusted gates and into the overgrown courtyard, the wind rustled through the dead leaves, and every step he took seemed to echo in the silence. Henry began narrating the asylum's history for his viewers as he entered the building. The main hall was vast, with peeling paint and graffiti covering the walls. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and the smell of mold and decay was overwhelming. He could almost feel the presence of the asylum's former inhabitants, their pain and suffering, lingering in the air. As he moved deeper into the building, he started to hear things. Faint whispers echoed down the corridors, too quiet to make out, but unsettling all the same. The shadows seemed to move in the corners of his vision, and every now and then, he caught a glimpse of something, someone, just out of reach. But whenever he turned to look, there was nothing there. Henry pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was the cold or the fear, but a deep unease had settled over him. In one of the old patient rooms, he found a broken wheelchair, its wheels rusted and squeaking as they spun slowly. He leaned in to get a closer shot, and that's when he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood. He spun around, shining his flashlight into the darkness, but the corridor behind him was empty. The tapping continued, growing louder, closer. Henry's breath caught in his throat as the flashlight flickered, casting strange, twisted shadows on the walls. Then he saw her. At the end of the corridor, a woman stood, in a tattered hospital gown, her hair hanging in matted clumps over her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light. Henry froze, his blood turning to ice. The figure started to move towards him, her feet barely touching the ground. The tapping grew louder, with each step she took, echoing off the walls, filling his head with a rising sense of panic. He wanted to run, to turn and flee, but his legs wouldn't obey. The air around him grew colder, and he could feel her gaze piercing through him, draining the strength from his body. The tapping was now a deafening roar, a sound that filled his mind, drowning out all thought. In a desperate attempt to break free, Henry raised his camera, hoping to capture whatever this was. But the screen was filled with static. He tried to back away, but the corridor behind him seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in around him. The figure was nearly upon him, her cold breath brushing against his face. Her hand reached out, fingers twisted and gnarled, and Henry could feel his sanity slipping away. He was trapped, caught between the terror of the unknown and the relentless approach of this ghostly figure. Just as she was about to touch him, the flashlight flickered one last time and died, plunging the corridor into complete darkness. Henry's screams echoed through the empty halls of Stonebridge Asylum, only to be swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. His body was found days later by a group of urban explorers who had heard rumors about the asylum and Henry's disappearance. They found him in the same corridor, his camera still clutched in his hand, but the footage was corrupted, a mess of static and distorted audio. The last thing they heard, before the recording cut off, was a faint, rhythmic tapping. Henry's final video was uploaded posthumously, a chilling reminder of the dangers that come with delving too deep into the unknown. Some say that his ghost now roams the halls of Stonebridge Asylum, joining the restless spirits that had claimed his life. And those who dare to watch his final video often report strange occurrences, whispers in the dark, shadows that move on their own, and the relentless sound of tapping that won't go away. But these are just stories, at least that's what we tell ourselves.